Thank you, Mr. Dearman. I just like to take note of the difficulties that we're having with Chairwoman Teresa Letter Fernandez staying on with the hearing, and that add a little bit also with Mr. Dearman shows some of the connectivity issues we may be having with parts of the nation. Although I must happily say that I am having no such issues where it's 1:30 in the morning your tomorrow, and where Miss Wagon is at 4:30 in the morning yesterday. So everyone, we're getting there a little at a time, but we're certainly getting there, and we'd like to have this no connectivity issues with our Bureau of Indian Education schools as well. Under Committee Rule 9A, we will not question the witnesses under the 5-minute rule. After the chairs and ranking members, I will recognize members of both subcommittee in the order of their seniority on the full committee. Again, to ensure that the members' 5-minute rule is adhered to, staff will be keeping track of time, and a blinking light will show when time has expired. Please be attentive to the time wrap up when your time is over and remute your microphone. As chair, I now recognize myself for 5 minutes. Director Dearman, in its 2017 report, the Government Accountability Office has said it was adding the Bureau of Indian Education's administration and oversight schools to its high-risk list because of evidence of unsafe school conditions, inconsistent school health and safety inspection, lack of workplace planning, and poor oversight of school spending of federal funds. In its subsequent reports, GIO also identified other high-risk issues such as the BIE's oversight of special education at schools. So could you discuss how the BIE has addressed or is addressing these high-risk issues? Are there high-risk areas that continue to be a challenge for the BIE to address? How can we as legislators support your efforts to address areas of high risk? And what actions have you taken to provide leadership and support to address GAO's recommendations on the BIE's high-risk status? If you can swing all of that in, that'd be appreciated.
Well, thank you, Chairman. Thank you for the question. I became director in November 2016, and we were placed on the high-risk list in 2017, and we gathered our leadership team immediately to address the GAO recommendations. And we will continue to address the GAO recommendations. As we've stated in our opening remarks, we have closed 23 of the 39 recommendations, and we feel comfortable and feel confident that we'll continue to work hard to close the remaining recommendations. We have a lot of the recommendations in getting close to packaging, closure packages for some of the recommendations, and we continue to work collaboratively with GAO. GAO has been a great partner, and as I've stated in previous hearings, Chairman, we will continue to work with GAO and use their recommendations as a roadmap to continue to make BIE better. We need the assistance. We feel like we totally agree with what GAO is saying, and we are proud of our leadership team in BIE because we are the most consistent leadership team that the BIE has had in the history of the organization. And we will continue to work hard to implement the recommendations, Chairman.
Well, thank you for that. Because, you know, like I am aware of educational jurisdictions that are in high risks, some of who have been in high risk for 20 years, and I understand maybe 30 years, and it's costing the local jurisdictions a lot of money. So thank you for that, Mr. Dearborn. Director Siwa, which of the recommendations that are still open do you believe will have the greatest overall impact if addressed? And what do you believe is a reasonable time for BIE to implement these recommendations?
Yes, we have one priority recommendation that is still open, which is for BIE to improve its delivery of special education and related services. Specifically, we recommended in 2020 that BIE develop a plan to make up missed special education services on a consistent basis across all BIE schools. We found in our report that BIE was not providing consistent services when their providers were out sick or absent for other reasons. That is the most important of the recommendations we feel for BIE to implement.
And so what do you believe BIE will have to take immediately to be able to achieve this target? And how has GAO been working with BIE to help achieve this timeline?
As Director Dearman testified, we do have very collaborative relationships with BIE and with Mr. Dearman and his leadership team. They have reported they are working to address our 10 open recommendations, including the one I just mentioned, to develop a consistent policy to make up missed special education services. Director Dearman would probably have a better idea of the timeframe for their implementation of these outstanding recommendations.
Thank you very much. I now turn to Ranking Member Owens for his 5 minutes of questioning. Mr. Owens, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Mr. Dearman, your testimony provided a good update on the BIE progress in addressing recommendations made by GAO over the last several years. You also discussed challenges BIE schools have faced during the COVID. What I didn't see in your testimony was any discussion about the low academic performance of BIE schools. Are there steps that BIE is taking to increase the learning outcomes of students in these schools? Mr. Dearman?
Thank you, Congressman. We have a lot of first evers in the Bureau of Indian Education, and we have our first ever owned standards assessment and accountability system that we've been working to implement. This past year is the first year that we've actually been able to collect the school data, or we'll be collecting school data from the assessments. Our plan is, Congressman, is to look at the data and make sure that we're filling in the gaps, providing resources based on data to fill in the learning gaps that we've experienced through the learning loss, through the pandemic. I can tell you this, Congressman, it is hard for me and my leadership team to hear the opening statements with the statistics that's been read and that's been the history of BIE, but I am proud to say that we are changing that. And we went out for consultation, we listened to our stakeholders, our tribal leaders, and it was important that we have our own standards assessment and accountability system so that we can have our own data and have control of that data versus having to work with the multiple states that our schools reside in. As I testified, Congressman, we have schools in 23 different states. We're having to try to work with 23 states in collecting that testing data. So that is the plan moving forward, but also with our new standards assessment and accountability system, we will have benchmarks to where we can start measuring where our students are and what we need to do to make sure that we address any learning gaps or any deficiencies that we may identify through the assessments.
Thank you. I want to focus my next question on one of the GAO reports you highlighted in your testimony. In May 2020, GAO released a report highlighting BIE's failure to provide special education student services they were entitled to under federal law. That was a report that was requested by Republicans on the Education and Labor Committee. From your testimony, it appears that in the 2 years since the report was released, none of the GAO's recommendations have been fully addressed. You mentioned a new special education policy and handbook that are forthcoming that you anticipate will fully address GAO's recommendations. Can you tell us more about what will be in the policy and handbook and how they will address GAO's recommendations?
Thank you, Congressman. Our anticipation, we anticipate having the policy and handbook this summer and ready to go out to our schools and start training. What we will have in our policy is guidance and expectations and the special education as far as servicing our students. The one key thing that the GAO did recommend that we make sure that we ensure is in the policy and the handbook is compensatory services, because we have to make sure that during the pandemic, we had to shift to a virtual setting and sometimes we had to shift to packets. and making sure that we are meeting the needs of our students that have individual education plans is critical. Since my tenure as director, Congressman, the one thing that we've experienced in the Bureau of Indian Education is the lack of policies. And it's important that we put policies in place so that we can make sure that regardless of who is in the leadership positions, our schools have guidance that they can follow, and it's written to where they can pull that off the shelf and make sure that our special education services are provided.
Okay, I have just less than a minute here. Ms. Siwa, I want to ask you this about the same report. How would you describe BIE's progress in implementing the recommendations from that report?
As I mentioned in my statement, BIE has not closed any of the 7 recommendations we had in our May 2020 special education report. As Mr. Dearman testified, BIE has told us they're working hard to develop policies to implement our recommendations. One thing that BIE did do shortly after our report was issued, though, was they rescinded the policy at their largest division of tribally controlled schools not to inspect 100% of documents on provision of special education services to students. At the time we did our work, the Office of Tribally Controlled Schools was only looking at, I believe it was 1/3 of all students' special education service delivery. So that's one positive thing that BIE did very shortly after our report was issued.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. And Chairman, I yield my time back.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Owens. Now we welcome back, of course, the always hardworking and wonderful person to work with, the Chairwoman, Teresa Fernández. You have 5 minutes of questioning, please. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, and to everybody on this hearing. My apologies. I am actually in with Navajo meeting on health issues, and so as we all know, we have a major issue without sufficient internet, and I had to come back into Gallup. So I wanted to address some of the issues with regards to underfunding. We did in the markup on the bill with regards to school construction talk about the manner in which school construction is incredibly underfunded, and we look forward to working with the chairman and the committee to increase the percentage that goes towards the Native American schools for construction. But I want to talk a little bit about the concept that we spend more on BIE students than in others. From the data I'm aware of, it's actually the opposite. And Assistant Director Siwa, as you know, we have amazing schools like the Santa Fe Indian School in my congressional district, which has tremendous success and student outcomes. It's also Pueblo governed. But we know that there are so many other schools that are not as successful and that they're significantly underfunded. I saw that the Department of Education reported that AIAN students are funded at 6,048, less than half of actual funds expended to educate non-Indian schools at 12,500 for fiscal year 2022. So how would the president's proposed $5 million funding increase for BIE in fiscal year 2023 help address the issues of inadequate funding of tribally controlled schools?
This is a question for me.
Yes, or
okay.
If it's whichever you.
Sorry, I'll defer to Director Dearman.
Okay.
Thank you, Congresswoman, for the question. We are definitely pleased with the president's 23 proposed budget because we do have increases. I'll throw some figures at you that will definitely show you the need of our system. In facilities alone, our budget is $420 million, and we have a deferred maintenance approximately of $915 million. We have 60 schools that are listed in poor condition that have not been funded yet as of now. And with that, we're looking at approximately $5.1 billion to replace the schools in poor condition. But again, we are pleased that we have an increase in the president's proposed budget. And we look forward to collaborating, to working closely with this committee and other committees and supporting our schools.
We also have the issue of the BIE educators and being able to retain and keep them when they are paid higher. New Mexico, I think we need to put more money into our schools. We recently did have a salary increase of $10,000 per teacher. What strategies are you going to use, and what do we maybe need to do at the federal level to make sure that when surrounding states increase wages for their teachers, there isn't, a transfer of talent out of our BIE and tribally controlled schools?
Great question, and thank you so much, because that has been a focus of ours in the Bureau of Indian Education. Currently, Congresswoman, we have 2 states that pay higher than the Bureau of Indian Education pays, and that is Oregon and California. We are aware that New Mexico increased their pay rates. And so what we have done in our Bureau operated schools is we've also increased ours to make sure that we're very competitive. One of the things that we've done also in the Bureau of Indian Education is coming in as a leadership team, we realized immediately that we had higher credentials or qualifications, and it was more difficult for teachers and applicants to qualify for teacher positions in BIE. So we adjusted to match the state qualifications of the 23 states that our schools reside in, which really helped us increase our applicant pool, make us more competitive. We've also been creative in making sure that we are offering incentives and providing trainings to our school leadership so that they can understand what funding pots that they have available to recruit and retain teachers. As far as staff that assist using the technical or provides technical assistance to our schools, we've been creative in that way as well by actually looking at remote positions. Because in BIE, the one thing that we have found out is if we can recruit locally and have people that know our culture, our traditions, know our communities, we have less turnover. And it really has a positive impact on our students and our communities. So what we've started doing too is when we classify a position that could be advertised remote. Guess what? We don't have to pull individuals from our tribal communities and have them report to an office somewhere that they don't want to live. We can actually set them up in their communities and have them as a remote employee and actually bring in people that know our communities, our cultures, our traditions, and know our tribes. And we're excited about that, and we look forward to that.
Thank you. We'll need to also make sure we get broadband to them so they can actually work in Indian country, as we've just discovered. I have some more questions, and we will submit those in writing, especially in my opening statement. I had really emphasized the importance of language and being able to have the fluency in language and including that in the school curriculum. I will submit those in writing. Mr. Chairman, I yield back. Thank you ever so much for your patience.
No, thank you. And yeah, you would think that connectivity will become a problem when you come to where Amata and I were at the end of the world where it drops off. But we're doing fine. So no, a lot of hope that things will get better for all of us, especially for Native American schools. Now, Mr. Abernathy of California, sir, thank you also for your patience. You have 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chairman Sablan. And thank you to our witnesses. Mr. Dearman, I'd like to direct a couple questions to you. Thank you very much for being here. It was very comforting to me to hear you talk about the transparency of the department and the fact that you agree with the recommendations that are made by the GAO and that you're working diligently to fix them. You were having a conversation with Chairman Sablan about the status of those remaining recommendations. Could you talk about the timeline on which the department proposes to have those remaining recommendations implemented?
Thank you, Congressman. What we can do is actually go back and break them down because there's 10 separate reports. And I think it would be, I I'd appreciate it if we could respond in writing with each recommendation with an estimated timeline.
Okay,
Because-
well, that would be great. I'll tell you what, why don't we'll talk about what is the recommendation with the furthest time horizon, and what is that horizon?
There is one that we have, again, understanding how unique the Bureau of Indian Education is. We have to work with other departments across Indian Affairs. And there is one that we've been working on with Indian Affairs that's pretty much out of our control, but we are working hand in hand to make sure that we assist. And I believe that is recommendation 17247. There's a recommendation 447. So there is a recommendation there that one is the one that it would be hard to list a timeline, but we will definitely continue working with the Division of Facility Management Construction around and getting that implemented.
Okay. So one of the disturbing pieces of testimony, and from my point of view that we've heard today, is when the GAO has said that merely crossing off all of these recommendations off the list will not be necessarily sufficient to remove the department from the high risk list. And specifically, the GAO is saying two things. First of all, that the staff vacancy rates are alarmingly high, which the statistics they quoted, I would certainly agree with them. Also, though, they said that the BIE is failing in some of their risk management responsibilities. So I'd like to talk about those two items, because obviously everyone here on the committee would like to see the BIE get off of the high risk list. The staff vacancy rate, you were just having a discussion with Chairman Ledger Fernández about this. If you're paying competitive salaries and you've got a great applicant pool and you're implementing remote work, why are these vacancy rates so high? And what is the department's plan to bring them down?
Great question. This is, like I said, Congressman, this has definitely been a focus of the Bureau of Indian Education. In addressing we have different levels. We have what we call a Title V category, which are our employees that are here to provide technical assistance to the schools. And currently, we have a 68%, all 68% of our positions are filled. 32% are vacant. At the school level, we have 91% of our positions totally filled, with 9% vacant. As a total in BIE as a whole, with approximately 3,500 employees, we are at 89% filled with an 11% vacancy rate. We hire based off of Indian preference. And we find out, and I'll give you an example of that, Congressman. We just closed a position where we had close to 70 applicants. By the time we apply Indian preference to the applicant pool, we were down to 7. By the time we go in and we look at the qualifications to meet the qualifications of that position, we were at 1. So when we hire Indian preference, we have to do a better job of getting out in the communities, getting to job fairs to show our tribes that there is a great opportunity to come into the Bureau of Indian Education, as well as other departments within Indian Affairs. I really feel like, Congressman, and we have increased this, we have actually hired 2 talent recruiters within the Bureau of Indian Education to actually go out and recruit from the colleges and universities that have teacher ed programs. But more importantly is getting, as I stated earlier, getting community members that know our communities to look at BIE as an opportunity to come in for employment, because we want and we need our tribal leaders at the table with recommendations of how we can get better, but also bringing in some of our community members, our tribal members in our school system. So we've been creative in addressing our vacancies, and we'll continue to be creative in addressing our vacancies.
Okay, well, thank you. That's going to be critical to getting off the GAO's list, high risk list. I see I'm out of time here. I've got some other questions related to risk management that I'll submit in writing. But as I close, let me just make the point that we see the number one statistic that bears on the job that the BIE doing is that of student achievement. And it's been troubling to me that some of the statistics that the BIE have been prioritizing and collecting, you were talking about collecting data, are not the ones related to student achievement, but ones relating to other things like absences. So we would really like to see you focus on student achievement. I'll submit the other questions in writing, but thank you for your testimony. Mr. Chair, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Obernolte. I now like to recognize Mr. Soto. Sir, you have 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chairman. We're here today because we need to make sure we're continuing to conduct our oversight duties and maintain confidence for the American people, particularly our Native American families. I do want to announce on the onset, we've come a long way. Those of us who sat through excruciating hearings about abuse in the past, in education institutions and in health institutions that were run by the federal government long ago, know how terrible a sin the country has committed, and even going back to historic times early on with the nation. But our job here is to right injustices, historic injustices, and to make sure that we never go backwards again. So when we see concerns about the Government Accountability Office discussing that the Bureau of Indian Education is listed as a high-risk agency, when there are concerns about COVID-19 pandemic funds, which happen in local governments too, by the way, and oversight of COVID relief funds, addressing learning loss, mental health issues, staff shortages, students with disabilities, infrastructure. It's important for us to continue to conduct our oversight duties. This is about families. This is about children in Native American, tribal, sovereign lands. Director Dearman, in a 2017 report, the GAO found that 19 of the Bureau's school construction projects were completed between 2003 to 2016 and took 3 or 4 more years than expected and were about 20% over budget. This spans several administrations. We understand that 4 new campuses open to students in 2021 and another 3 are to be completed in 2022 with more planned. What is the current state of schools' facilities and the status of replacing those in poor condition?
Thank you, Congressman. This is something that I feel like in 2006, when we became our own Bureau of Indian Education became its own bureau in 2006. The one thing that was missing in that process was service level agreements to establish clear roles and responsibilities of who's responsible for what in our facilities department. Since then, I am proud to report that we have been working closely with Division Facilities Management Construction, as well as the Bureau of Indian Affairs, to make sure that we have these service level agreements in place. We work with DFMC to make, because we do what we call a quarterly facility condition index report. And this is how critical our Maximo system is which is a system that we go in and we train our schools to enter all the deferred maintenance issues within the school. And in our tenure, you will have observed an increase in deferred maintenance, because again, it's important for us to make sure that we have accurate data to provide to our tribes as well as Congress, so that we can identify the areas that we need support and assistance with.
Please continue.
We continue to work with DFMC and the Bureau of Indian Affairs to address the deferred maintenance issues. We have a list of schools actually listed as far as FCI scores, and that hasn't been done in years. So I feel like we are standing things up, working collaboratively with departments across Indian Affairs to address our facilities issues throughout our system.
Thank you, Director Dearman. My second question is, how has the COVID-19 pandemic affected progress on these school replacements and more generally construction and repairs?
Thank you, Congressman. Great question. As stated earlier in some of the opening remarks, our tribal nations was hit extremely hard by the pandemic. And I am proud to say, and I'm proud of my BIE leadership team and our field staff, we've been able to support all the tribes that we have worked closely with. So if we had construction, first thing we would do is pull in our tribal leadership to make sure that we were aligned with their executive orders that they had in place, whether it be shelter in place, but we worked with our tribes. And Congressman, I will need to go back to the department, but I'm not aware of projects that were being held up and that were postponed due to the pandemic. But I'll verify that and provide that in writing.
Thank you, Mr. Director Jerman. We appreciate you supplementing your answers today and giving us greater confidence that we're streamlining these processes for more efficiency. And I yield back.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Soto. I now like to recognize Mr. Allen, please. Mr. Allen, you have 5 minutes, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, sir.
Good, good. Well, listen, I want to thank Mr. Chairman, you and Ranking Member Owens for this hearing today. You know, I'm a firm believer in that parents should play a role in our children's education. You know, and of course, parent involvement in education has been a major topic this year. And of course, piggybacking on Mr. Obenotti's question as well, I guess my first question with regard to teachers, what is the starting salary for a teacher? You said you had 70 apply. What's the starting salary for a teacher? Mr. Dearborn.
Thank you, Congressman Allen. You know, I don't have that figure right now in front of me, but I can definitely provide that.
Okay.
As I stated, we have been monitoring the states that pay more than the BIE because we want to make sure that we're very competitive.
Right.
There are issues that we are looking at as well is in recruiting staff from public schools in the government, they can only bring in 5 years of retirement. And so what we are finding out is that we're going to get staff at the very beginning of their education teaching profession or at the very end, because Congressman, it's hard to pull state teachers that have been invested in a state retirement 15 years and recruit them to where they can only bring 5 in to the BIE. So there are some things that we've identified.
And because these schools are located on the reservation, they cannot participate in state retirement programs?
They are federal. We are a federal system or a tribal system, depending on how the schools are operated.
Right.
Congressman, I do need to say this too. The one thing that really impacts our recruitment of teachers is also our quarters, because we have to make sure that we have quarters to recruit teachers too. And right now, our quarter situation, that is something we're working across the department to make sure that we address, because some of our quarters, Congressman, make it hard to recruit teachers.
Well, give me an example of those.
We have 1,988 quarters across 87 sites. And I feel like that throughout this process of separating the Bureau of Indian Education, no clear lanes of responsibility, some of the quarters have, they're in poor condition. And moving forward, I am proud to say that we've been working across Indian Affairs. We have these service level agreements in place and working with the tribes to where we can actually, we have plans moving forward to address the quarter situation. But that is one thing, Congressman, that has impacted our recruitment in our, especially our isolated areas where there's no other housing around, is the quarters. And I want to make sure that I'm on record as saying that does impact teacher recruitment.
Right. So a teacher has to live on the reservation as a requirement of employment?
No, sir. That's not it. But some of our locations are so far from the nearest city or town that it's hard for them to drive an hour and a half, 2 hours, sometimes even 3 or 4 every day, one way to the school site.
Right. So you operate totally independent from the state in which you reside. Is that correct?
As far as benefits and pay, yes.
Okay. All right. So as far as parental involvement in education, any of your parents of the children requested the opportunity for their child to be educated and off the reservation? In other words, let the money follow the student to give them a better chance of accomplishing their goals?
I'm not aware of parental requests at this time, Congressman, but that's something we can definitely put out a data request to see if we have parents that are requesting that.
Right.
And we do have schools and at sites where there are no other options, but then we also have a lot of schools where the parents do have options to send their children.
I think it'd be good to listen to your parents and their needs and give every student the opportunity to succeed. And that's why, I'm so positive about school choice and all across this country. All right. Well, I'm out of time, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Mr. Allen. I now think this is going to go faster than we thought. So I now like to yield and wake up Miss Raduagan, who's all the way at home in American Samoa. Aloha. Ms. Raduagan, you have 5 minutes, please.
Aloha, and
Aloha.
thank you to Chairs Ledger, Fernández, and Sablan, Ranking Members Obernolte and Owens for holding this joint hearing today. And thank you to the panel for your testimony. Couple questions here for you, Director Dearman. How has the Bureau of Indian Education provided instruction to students enrolled at boarding schools during the pandemic? And have all boarding schools reopened for in-person learning?
Great question. Our residential settings have been.
Their biggest problem.
That was a challenge. Feedback, I apologize. That was a challenge. We currently have 44 residential settings within our system, and 22 of those are operated by the tribes, and 22 we directly operate. And again, I am proud of my teams because we work closely with the tribes. And if the tribes put in executive orders or shelters in place, or they wanted us to go remote, we would shift to remote to support our tribal leadership and protect our tribal community members. At certain locations, depending on the community's access to the internet, depending on the IT equipment that was located at the school, we had to take a lot of things into account to determine how we were going to make sure that we shifted and provided a virtual education to our students. So it's going to vary throughout our system. And again, just looking at the different scenarios and situations with IT equipment, broadband, we could talk about this for hours because it's unique and so different and across our 64 reservations that we have schools located in. But moving forward, I will say this, we had weekly meetings with Indian Health Service, CDC, because we wanted to make sure that we provided the safest structure, working along with the local health authorities and tribal leadership in all of our settings, not just residential, but all of our settings, to make sure that they were safe in returning our students and our staff. And I feel confident that we accomplished that.
Thank you, Director Dearman. My time is very short and I've got another question. Now,
Okay.
Inflation and rising fuel prices are sure to impact the Bureau being able to support transportation for these students. How much additional funding will be needed to maintain current level of service because of these rising costs?
Thank you for that, Congresswoman. I am happy to say that, again, we have increases within our budget that we anticipate will assist with this. That's yet to be determined because of the gas prices in different locations, but we will definitely work closely with our schools to pull that data. And we work with our schools if they are experiencing shortages or problems. That's our job, is to come in and provide technical assistance and be creative in finding solutions to help our schools. As of right now, I don't have the data that you've asked for as far as gas impacts on our school operations, but that is definitely something our school operations teams working with the schools will definitely keep an eye on.
Thank you. Thank you, chairs. I yield back the balance of my time.
All right, thank you, Ms. Radwagon, and thank you for making the effort to join us at such an early time for you as well.